Good morning, everyone. Welcome to House Judiciary. Hopefully our last Monday of the session. Keep our fingers crossed. First bill today will be Senate File 105. Can I get a show of hands? How many people in the room are here to testify on 105? Okay, it's a very small number. All right. We do have two bills this morning, and we've had a lot of early mornings this session trying to accommodate the volume of legislation. So we will move through the bills as expeditiously as possible. We do have rules of decorum, and we expect to follow those if we're basically nice to each other and no outbursts, no yelling, no threatening. We just talk about the issues and respect one another. Everybody will be fine. But we will have limited amounts of time this morning, as just true throughout the interim, where time is of the essence. And so I encourage folks who testify to keep their comments on point, specific to the bill. Help us make these bills something better than they are. Speak to the language in the bills, speak to your desire for the bill, but stay on point. Sometimes it's easy to get rambling when we testify, and we just don't have time for every witness to ramble this morning. So we want to hear from those who have important things to tell us as we consider these bills. So why don't we start, Debbie, call the roll.
Representative Chestick?
Here.
Representative Crago?
Here.
Representative Haraldson?
Here.
Representative Jennings? Here. Representative Nemec? Here. Representative Oakley? Here. Representative Provenza? Representative Rodriguez-Williams? And Chairman Washut.
Here. So the approach I take in this committee is we begin with the sponsors of the bill, introducing the bill to us, walking us through. Then we will hear from other legislators in the room who want to testify on the bill. Then we will hear from state agencies that are in the room that want to testify on the bill. And then we go to public comment, and everyone else will join in. We'll take the public comment from those in the room first, and then we will take public comment from those who are waiting to testify in the Zoom world, okay? So, Senate File 105, Senator Larson. I keep wanting to say representative because that's where we met, but Senator Larson, Senate File 105.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone and committee. Thank you for hearing the bill. This is Senate File 105. I'm just going to go through a little bit of history on it. In September of 2022, under pressure from groups of anti-firearms advocates, the World Organization on Standardizations announced that it would begin implementing a merchant code to specify and track firearm retail sales. There are over 500 merchant codes. One is assigned to every business. They are given by a third party as a part of electronic payment services. Payment settlements in entities, merchant acquiring entities, or third-party settlement organizations assign the code to the merchant. The merchant doesn't choose their own code, but once assigned, it follows every transaction from that point of sale. Anti-gun interests have made it clear that they want to be able to either monitor or stop otherwise legal purchases by requiring firearms in entities to use a very specific code, and then to track or deny transactions with that code. Sometimes using a process called a Suspicious Activity Report, or SAR, given to law enforcement. In Senate File 105, it prohibits the assignment of a code that would be uniquely specific to firearm retail related business. In committee, this bill was improved and simplified in our Senate committee by an amendment negotiated by Firearms Trade Association, Wyoming banks, and credit unions. The definition of merchant category code was added to the bill. The language payment processor was replaced with a much broader definition intended to cover all entities that would potentially act as signed merchant codes, now called merchant servicers in the bill. Language was added to clarify this bill did not apply to standard private business practice within banks, federally required records at a point of sale, and specific documents required as part of a law enforcement action. The Attorney General is empowered to enforce compliance. That includes injunctions and any other relief the court deems appropriate. This is an important bill. California mandates the code. Other states are also working on legislation to require it within their borders. The result will be denials of sales and services to their citizens and the closure of many firearms stores in those states. Credit card companies are on the record. The code will not be turned on in any state that prohibit use by law. 7 states have acted to prohibit the code in 2023. Wyoming needs to protect its businesses and citizens by doing the same. I'll go through the bill now, Mr. Chairman. It's pretty short and concise. Starting on the second page, toward the bottom, we start defining with some definitions. We have assign or assignment means a policy, process, or practice that labels and links otherwise associates a firearms or ammunition code with a merchant. We define a customer. We define disclosure. We'll define a financial record. And we define firearms code, which means any code or other indicator that a merchant servicer assigns to a merchant. We define on page 4 firearms retailer, what a government entity is, protected financial information. And then this is one of the new definitions we put in. Merchant category code means a classification code assigned by a merchant processor to merchants. And then the other one we mentioned, merchant servicer, means a payment settlement entity, a merchant acquiring entity, or a third-party settlement organization. Then on page 5, line 11, we talk about prohibitions on data and the use. It just states that no government agency or local government, special district, or political subdivision or any other person, public or private, shall knowingly or willfully keep or cause to be kept any list or record or registry of privately owned firearms. Down toward the bottom on page 5 is where we had an amendment added by the banking group and credit units, which is a good item. It says this subsection shall not apply to any financial institution that is not a merchant servicer or to any record maintained in the ordinary course of business of any financial institution. One of the main parts of the bill is the next part on line 4. No merchant servicer shall require the usage of or assign a firearms code or other merchant category code to any merchant located in Wyoming that is a seller of firearms, fire accessories, or ammunition. The next part on line 6 talks about civil actions and how the Attorney General will deal with issues that come forward. First, she'll send out a letter. They have 30 days to respond. If they don't, then she can, or the Attorney General can, sorry about that. Toward the end, the Attorney General may pursue an injunction against any person alleged to be in violation of this act. A court may order an injunction in addition to any other relief as the court may consider appropriate. And then we, on the bottom of page 7, we have the issue on granting immunity and exceptions to that. So that's pretty much the bill. I do want to emphasize the bill isn't about the credit cards. The issue is the code that the merchant is assigned. That's the issue. We want to make sure that the firearms can't be tracked. That's it. Ready for questions.
Committee, questions for Representative Chestik?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, thank you for bringing this bill. I am, to be blunt, confused by it. I'm not quite sure what the intent of the bill is. And I also am concerned about unintended consequences. So set aside guns for, these merchant codes have some commercial function in the world for other items. Is that correct?
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, the merchant code is assigned to a merchant. So it could be a sporting goods store or a grocery store or whichever. We're just saying that we want to make sure that there isn't a code that is specific to firearms, fire ammunition, and other items dealing with firearms.
Representative Shostak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But these merchant codes do, how are they used? Again, setting aside guns for now, for other, why do we have merchant codes at all? Who uses them? Who has access to them? What are they? What is the commercial function of these merchant codes
Senator?
outside the gun context?
Mr. Chairman, I might have to get called for help on that one, but I'm guessing, well, I'm going to say it's for data collection. There are entities out there or people or whatever that want to know what you are buying and track where you've been and that sort of stuff, I guess. And then, they're going to track at the grocery store. They have a code, and I think it's data collection.
Senator, do you have a witness who will testify later who might be able to
Yes.
answer that? Very
Yes,
good.
Mr. Chairman.
Further questions?
I will say further questions for whatever witness you have to explain that, because I'm not understanding why anybody wants to track what groceries I purchase. That doesn't make sense to me. I'll save my questions. Thank you.
Further questions? Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, thank you for bringing this. I appreciate it. Obviously, as we've seen what's kind of gone down in the rest of the country, this is pertinent and relevant to today. Question for you. Obviously, you put that civil action conversation in there where we see in other areas of our statute when it comes to other bills we passed recently, there was more of a criminal conversation. Can you talk to me about civil, criminal? What was your reason and logic behind the civil side instead of a criminal side for this?
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. The main goal was to get the bill passed. Obviously, criminal may make it a little tougher. I think this gives the organizations that are putting these merchant codes on there that we're going to say as a state, we do not want you to use one for ammunition sales so they can be tracked. So as a state, we're gonna say that you can't do it. There are 7 other states, I think, like I said earlier, that have passed this. And there are other states, like I mentioned, California, that's gonna say, we're gonna make you put it on there. So I think that's the biggest part. We want to send the message.
Further questions for Senator? Thank you very much. Other legislators wishing to testify on 105? Any other legislators wishing to testify on 105? Any on Zoom? Any legislators? No, I don't think so. All right, state agencies in the room. Anybody, state agencies? Oh, there's Senator. Please come forward.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the ability to talk to senators, I think, because they're on the other side. I just want to maybe, given the room is packed, and it's obviously your discretion, I respect that. I'd like to maybe make sure we save public comment for the public and folks that are here to testify, just given we have unlimited access to these folks.
That's true, but this is the pattern we've used throughout the session. We bring in the sponsors and other legislators. We'll make sure we get testimony. So, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. I'll be brief. I just want to talk on the one part where it was mentioned where they didn't know why the codes would be used. I can assure you that everything that you buy is tracked and data is sold. And the problem is that on the gun side, that data could be used for nefarious reasons. And that's why this bill is important. So I urge you to support this bill. And maybe next year, if we find there's some issues, we'll straighten them out then. Maybe even make this bill stronger next year. I mean, it's needed. The data is, I mean, in essence, someone on the other side of the world could buy data and find that who the gun owners are and who those people are. So I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Questions? Thank you, Senator. Any other legislators wishing to testify? Any state agencies in the room wishing to testify? All right, we'll open up public comment. Mr. Cole.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Nephi Cole. I'm the Director of Government Relations and State Affairs for the National Shooting Sports Foundation, which is the Firearms Trade Association of America. It's NEPHICOLE. So we represent the 10,000 manufacturers, retailers, and distributors of firearms, ammunition, components, optics, hunting boots, outdoor magazines, things like that in the United States of America. So this bill affects our members. First of all, I'd like to thank the sponsors who brought this bill and all those who've worked on this bill. I'd like to thank the banks and the credit unions for their understanding and their hard work on finding solutions and working with everybody on this. So briefly, what are MCCs? MCCs are a code that's assigned by a third-party entity to a given merchant. And then that code will follow all electronic sales from that point of sale, from that merchant. And so that code, if it were Walmart and you were purchasing at, that code would be general merchandise. If you went to a Cabela's, that code would be sporting goods. And so there was an effort internationally in the last couple of years to have a specific firearm code that was unique to just firearms retailers. So if that code is assigned to you, a unique thing happens. Now, everything you buy at that firearms retailer would be coded as a firearm. So let's say you went to that firearms retailer and you bought a tent. It's coded as a firearm, or Twinkies, or Reese's, or boots. Likewise, if you bought a gun at Walmart, what is it coded as? General merchandise. And so this code is not specific, but it does give you the ability, if you did that, to, if you're an entity, a mom and pop gun shop, and what you deal in is firearms, it gives the ability to turn on and off the ability to purchase at that specific entity. And it also means anything that comes out of that entity is going to be coded as such, as a firearms transaction. We see that as very problematic. These codes are generally broad, like general merchandise, like sporting goods. And at the end of the year, you're going to get a statement from your credit card company. It's going to show you in what categories you generally spent your money in: sporting goods, groceries, and whatnot. And so that's what these codes are used for. We think it's appropriate that these codes do stay general and that they not be used to exclusively identify small firearms shops and would prejudicially put them out of business. And we think there are some other strong negative implications. We thank you for supporting this bill. We strongly support this bill, and we ask you to move it forward and get it passed.
Questions? Representative Chestik, did he answer your question? No. On the code? Anything further? Questions? Representative Jennings?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cole, thank you for being here. Just off the top of your head, can you think of any other constitutionally protected industry that might be also put in this category of trying to gather data on?
Mr. Cole?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, no.
Representative Chestik?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cole, I'm still confused by how these codes are used. What you're telling me is that these codes are grossly inaccurate and they are not accomplishing any purpose that's useful, really. And I'm not sure I believe that, but if that's the problem, why isn't the solution? What is there any public solution? These are private transactions, right? And so you're telling me that these merchant codes are designed by private entities to provide information to me as a consumer when I get my statement from the credit card company about where I'm spending my money. what's wrong with that? But you're saying it's inaccurate, that if I buy a gun at Walmart, it's not coded correctly. If I buy a stick of chewing gum at a gun store, it's not being coded accurately. Isn't the problem, so this doesn't solve that problem. So I guess, how does this bill solve any problem that the government has any business intervening in?
Mr. Cole.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I think, first I'd like to just say, I don't think the issue is that they are not accurate, they're not precise. And there's a difference between the accuracy and precision. And so they're used accurately, but the thing is they capture large groups of things. They're assigned by the International Order of Standards. So they were designed for a specific financial function to be able to put things in nice, tidy little boxes. But the box is rather large. So where it becomes problematic from the firearms side is, and these are tracked when you say, between private entities, these are shared. So for example, a suspicious activity report would be a report by a financial institution that then is shared with government that says there's certain categories or certain ways that things are used that we are unhappy with. And so perhaps, and this is real, this happens, perhaps an agent should look into this person and their individual spending habits. And so that's a real thing that's happening today in other areas, and it's used to profile different entities and people. And it's a real thing. I will tell you, we worked with Visa, MasterCard, and American Express on language on these bills. They've been passed in now 8 states. Utah passed a merchant category code bill last week, and it's now law in the state of Utah. So it's, the credit card companies have been great assets and help with us. They did not want to see a specific, Visa does not want to see a specific merchant category code for firearms either. It was politicized when it was created. They would like it to remain broad.
Representative Jessic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So how does this information get into the government's hands? These are all private transactions, credit card transactions. I don't understand how this information gets into the government's hands to begin with, number one. And number two, what does the government do with this information? It would be illegal for the government to say you can't buy a gun if you have a right to buy a gun. So how is this information possibly being misused by the government? I'm not understanding what the problem is.
Mr. Cole.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So it would be difficult for me to impugn the different administrations or what they choose to do or not do with data. What we have seen in the firearms industry with certainty is we've seen efforts through, for example, Operation Choke Point, where the federal government put pressure on, and this was through the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency and the Department of, I believe it was Treasury, put pressure on financial institutions to begin specifically tracking and even denying services to certain industries. So they had a list of industries. Firearms is one of those industries where they insisted that entities that chose to do business with or provide financial services to these entities, firearms companies, would be audited at a higher rate than other businesses. The result was a huge loss of financial services for members of our industry. And there was a whistleblower that stopped, but the Department of Justice sent out a letter, said, we know this wasn't the appropriate thing to do. Everybody stopped doing this. But it's acknowledged that really happened. So could it happen again? We absolutely know it could happen again. And we know that it is a goal of certain administrations to harm our industry, and we're concerned that this would be a tool to do so.
Mr. Cole, how does the government access this information from private industry? I don't think you answered that component.
My apologies, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. They ask for it.
Representative Chesnick, one follow-up, and then we'll go to Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cole, so what you're suggesting is that the government is somehow misusing this information. They're trying to do something that is illegal. It is not illegal to sell guns. It's not illegal to manufacture guns. But you're suggesting that the administration is somehow trying to use this information improperly to put improper pressure on that industry. If that's the problem, then why don't we solve that problem instead of this one? Because these codes, I think, have some commercial value. Let's ask Congress to make sure that the federal government is not doing anything. Let's solve the actual problem and not try and interfere with private transactions.
Mr. Cole.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we think you're partially correct. We are working on the federal level as well. We're working on both sides of this issue. Again, there is now a merchant category code prohibition bill that is by Representative Stefanik at the national level that exists as well. I do want to emphasize, we're not saying that the government has done anything nefarious with this at this point, but also there's a third-party application to this that is negative, which is if you identify all entities that transfer firearms with this specific code, you would give a third party, for example, a credit entity, the ability to decide that their card could not be used at a location that uses that code.
Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cole, I'd like to shift the question a little bit here, because I hear you talking about generalities and Walmart and all of that sort of thing, but I see this as actually much more specific to small industry. Because in my town, I have a number of places that only sell firearms. Would this not be very specific, and would that information not be very easy to track then and say, I mean, if you go to Walmart, maybe you bought cheese puffs, and it might be labeled as this, and it would be very generalized. But if you go to one of our small gun sellers, that's all he sells. That's all he sells. So wouldn't that make it very specific to some of this industry?
Mr. Cole.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, yes, and that's our concern.
Further questions for Mr. Cole? Thank you. Mr. Winnie.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. We're in an information age, an all-digital world. This thing right here is far more powerful than the very first desktop computer I ever bought. And I think the key here is when I went through my master's program, one of the courses I took was software. And one of the significant subtopics in that was data mining, the ability to get into voluminous data and pick out specific things that you were interested in. And that's what this bill gets to. I have a Smith's card, or here in Cheyenne, it's a King Soopers card. They know exactly who I am by name. They know what I'm buying. They use that information to figure out how to stock their store in the long run. Some years ago, I used to buy their glazed donuts when they were $2 a box. Now they're $7 a box, and I quit buying them. They know that. So what's the problem that this bill tries to solve? Well, the issue is the information is there. Bureaucrats do things because they can. I was commanding officer of a ship twice in my 30 years of active duty, and I wrote instructions and standing orders that had all the force of law. And if something was illegal, it was dependent upon the individual to call me on it. Now, I didn't have that problem directly, but the question now becomes who's the arbiter of an illegal act? And the arbiter is our court system. And you can reason that any way you want, but it may not come out the way you'd like it to. So the point here is not whether it's harmful directly, but what that information, what use it could be put to simply by bureaucratic fiat. Subject to your questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for Mr. Winnie? Thank you. Always nice to see you. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Brian Gosh. I'm a lawyer and registered lobbyist with the National Rifle Association of America, here to support this bill today and answer a few of the questions that have been asked so far. One of the reasons for this bill is the federal government, under federal law, cannot track and store data of gun owners, the types of guns, the amount of ammunition they're buying, and things like that. And so they look to do an end run through the private sector, outsource that basically through credit card companies, banks, financial institutions, by setting up unique merchant category codes for firearms and firearm dealers. Now, if you have a credit card with a rewards program, merchant category codes might be beneficial. You might have certain categories that offer better rewards back. If there was a unique reward, 50% cash back for every firearm bought, every firearm owner might support a merchant category code for firearms, but that's not how they're using it. They're not trying to get you more money back. Typically, when the left can't get something done through you, the policymakers, whether federal or state, they look for other ways to do it. And so you have large financial institutions with a lot of money, a lot of power, looking to do an end run around you to set up a firearm registration and tracking system, although it may not be as specific as the serial number and make and model of that firearm. It gives them information as to who's going to firearm dealerships, who's making purchases there. They can store that data, and then if they choose to, feed it to the federal government, who's not currently allowed to do that themselves. So for that reason and others, we would appreciate your support of this bill.
Questions for Mr. Goss? Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here.
Yep.
Mr. Jones?
Mr. Chairman, committee, my name is Mark Jones. I'm a national director with Gun Owners of America. We represent almost 3 million Americans, and I live in Johnson County, Wyoming. GOA certainly supports the concepts in this bill. I would like to point out that on page 8, this bill does two things. This, in section 9-14-303, section A, this bill stops the collection of a list of records of a registry of firearms purchases. Under section B, it stops the establishment of a merchant category code. The devil's in the details. The penalties are at the bottom of page 8, line 22. And the penalty for this is a civil action. And that requires someone to sue and go to court. This is one of the weakest civil penalties I've seen. It doesn't allow an individual to sue. It is at the discretion of the Attorney General. And in two places in this bill, it says the Attorney General may. That means the Attorney General may decide to enforce this. So we certainly support the concepts in the bill, but we don't think it's strong enough. And I suggest that you add a criminal penalty along with the civil. Don't take it out, leave it in. Add a criminal penalty and establish a penalty for violation of 914-303A, the collection of a registry, and establish a criminal penalty for the violation of 9-14-303B, the establishment of a merchant category code. This will give Wyoming prosecutors the ability to prosecute and put teeth into this law should it pass. Otherwise, we're kidding ourselves that we're passing something with a civil action that the Attorney General may decide to enforce. We've had similar discussions about other bills in this session that have civil penalties. At least those allow an individual to go to court. People are completely glossing over the fact that that individual has to hire an attorney on their behalf and sue with those other bills. In this case, you can't even do that here. So let's put teeth in this thing. Let's put a criminal penalty in it. 2 years ago, we passed the Second Amendment Protection Act. It's in our statutes. Now, that applies to officials. It's very clear that the current SAPA applies to government officials. So we have to do a criminal penalty in this bill slightly differently. I've provided language to some members of the committee I hope will be brought forward today. It's very simple to do. There's several attorneys up here. You know how to do it. Our suggestion is that any person who violates Section A be guilty of a misdemeanor with imprisonment of not more than a year and a fine of not more than $2,000. Section A is the registry part. It's the more critical part of this. Section B, we would recommend a misdemeanor punishable by a fine of $1,000 for each and every time a code is established. So it would get very expensive. So I support the concepts. I really appreciate the organizations that brought this and the legislators. I testified to this in the Senate committee. I was the only gun lobbyist that testified on this bill on the committee side in the Senate. And I have been saying since the beginning of this session, this bill needs a criminal penalty. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jones, thank you for being here. And I'm inclined to go that way simply from the fact that this is a constitutionally protected activity, and so therefore it rises to a higher level. But can you speak to, and maybe it'll be the financial institutions. If data is collected improperly or mishandled properly, do we have any other of those? Do those rise to a level of criminal activity? Or are we singling, I mean, I'm okay with it because it's a constitutionally protected activity. I'm okay with that rising to the level of criminal. But is there any other data collecting that rises to that level, to criminal?
Mr. Jones?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Representative Jennings, I'm not aware of other purchases that the government and financial entities have expressed such a nefarious intent. And it's very clear. There are financial institutions that have expressly said their goal is to revoke credit from businesses that sell firearms. That's been in the news. You can look at that up. This is not going to impact the big boys like Cabela's and Shields because they're not going to get assigned the codes. It's going to impact the mom and pop shops in the small towns around Wyoming. And one of the goals of this is to revoke their credit when they realize that their primary business is selling firearms. The other thing that I'll point out, our organization has been very clear in our accusation that the Biden administration is already keeping an illegal gun registry. Congress made that illegal. But if you've bought a gun in the last several years, you're in an illegal registry that's being kept right now. So there are really serious constitutional questions involved here. And that's why we believe that this does rise to the level of a crime. If I was a prosecutor in Wyoming, I would already prosecute under SAPA, personally, okay? But as we all know, everyone here on this committee, we try to write statutes and legislation to be very clear so that there are no misunderstandings, because this is all very complex, and you know, the legal world's very complex, and I think it's good to be very explicit and very clear with what the penalties will be.
Thank you very much. Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jones? Yes, sir. So on this criminal penalty section, do we think a misdemeanor with a small $1,000 penalty is enough? I mean, is that enough of a deterrence? If we're actually going to go down that road, do we need to make it bigger and better?
Mr. Jones.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Craigo, our organization would certainly not be opposed to a stronger penalty. We proposed, you know, 2 different penalties for the registry up to a year in jail, because that's a very egregious thing to keep a gun registry. And we proposed $1,000 for each time a merchant category code is assigned. So if someone comes in and gets 6 items and there's 6 codes, that could be $6,000. But I certainly defer to the expertise of this committee to figure out the best way to do this under Wyoming statute. That was just a starting point for discussions. I certainly believe it would have teeth in it and would make entities think twice before tracking firearms purchases in the state of Wyoming.
Follow up.
Follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just thinking out loud here, so bear with me and apologize. But for example, if that data is being used to gain to have financial gain, so what? I have to pay $1,000 fine, but in the meanwhile, I've made $1 million. It's no big deal. And I'm just concerned that if we're going to do that, we ought to put more. If we're going to put teeth in it, let's put the right amount of teeth in it, I guess, is sort of my thinking along those lines. Your thoughts?
Mr. Jones.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Craigo, I believe the current penalty that the Attorney General may pursue is pretty insignificant. And I don't remember the exact number that was used in here. I'm trying to find it. I don't even know if it says the Attorney General may investigate, the Attorney General may pursue an injunction. So I don't really see that what we have now has a lot of teeth. So I think adding what I'm suggesting, where you could go to jail for the registry and where you could be subject to a $1,000 fine for each time you track it, I think that would have a lot more teeth than we currently have. And I will point out, I don't know that these financial entities benefit financially from this information. If you look at the international news that's been put out about this, the national news stories, some of the entities that have pushed this have expressly said their goal is to run the small firearm shops out of business. It's not about them making more money. This is an anti-gun, anti-firearm effort. This is what this merchant category code assigned to firearms is all about.
Representative Rodriguez-Williams, just keep moving. We've got more witnesses.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jones, you mentioned the illegal gun registry at the federal level that's being kept. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on this in regards to this bill. So it's my understanding that there are some Wyoming businesses that deal with firearms that are unnecessarily being audited by the IRS. And I'll actually use the word targeted by the IRS. Do you believe that this bill would help with that in regards to that gun registry?
Mr. Jones, briefly.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Williams, yes, absolutely. I believe all this is part of a grand plan. I'm not saying there's coordination, but there are entities around the world, international and in this country, whose goal is to disarm the American people. It's very clear. You have to be living under a rock not to know that. It's in the news every day. There's a registry being kept. We have sued the ATF for violating the rights of various entities and businesses very publicly. The IRS has now been weaponized against the American people. So absolutely, this is all part of a grand plan to know who has weapons, how many they have, how many they buy, how frequently they buy them, who sells them to people, and everything else, so that eventually the ultimate goal of the left is to confiscate weapons. That's very clear.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Let's see any more questions.
Thank you.
Any other witnesses on Senate File 105?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bobby Frank, representing Wyoming's credit unions.
Hi.
Hey. Mr. Chairman, as the bill came out of the Senate with the amendments, we're more comfortable with the bill. I would tell you that the easiest way to solve this problem would be if the ISO would have not adopted this code to begin with. And just to review the history of this issue, after the ISO adopted the code, after political pressure caused them to do so, the major credit card networks in the fall of 2022 announced that they would assign the code and utilize the code. It was very clear from the coverage that it was to track gun purchases. Shortly thereafter, in March of 2023, those same credit card companies announced that they would put a pause on adopting the code, in part due to pressure from states and state attorney generals challenging them for adopting the code to track gun purchases, and that included Wyoming's attorney general. So I think it's clear where Wyoming's attorney general stands on the issue. From discussions with previous testimony, representatives of previous testimony, as well as major credit card network, this code can be turned on state to state. And currently there is legislation in some states to require the code to be turned on, and there's legislations to require the code to be turned off. Our concern with the prior bill, the way they were drafted, which I believe is addressed in the amendments in consultation with our legal counsel, is we were holding the financial institutions, including your local credit card companies, liable and responsible for the code being turned on, assigned, and tracked. We do not do that. We don't have the ability to do that. Only the card networks, as well as the merchant acquirers, can. However, the cards that our institutions, our credit unions issue, will have a code affiliated with them if the code's turned on. We concur that the code shouldn't be used. We concur that lists shouldn't be developed. We also want to recognize that our files, our financial records, will have information should it be turned on, which the purpose of the bill, as we understand it, is to prevent it from being turned on in the first place. I would offer that we would be a little more uncomfortable if you add a criminal penalty. I think if you look at the definition section in the reference to the IRS code, this is complicated, And the entire payment network system is very complicated. You have merchant acquirers, you have merchant codes, you have service providers. There's a number of parties involved in a transaction. And I think there's enough gray there to cause hesitation with criminalizing this, especially when our Attorney General has gone on record expressing concern with the use of the code. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Representative Chesty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Frank, thank you for being here. I'm still confused, and maybe you can help me understand set aside guns. I don't care what the code is. What is the general purpose for having merchant codes? What is the commercial advantage or reason for having those in the first place for any category?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Chesak. Well, I think previously stated testimony, and I'll defer to Mr. Myers on some of this as well, but that's how you get your reward points. If you buy an airline ticket, you get rewards. It's how, if you've noticed on your credit card statements, it's also a budgeting tool. You can look and see how much groceries you bought this month. So there are benefits to codes. Having said that, this is a very politicized code. So we understand the concern with it. And quite frankly, the credit unions of Wyoming would just as soon the code go away in general. So, and I'll defer to Mr. Meyer to provide any more details on the use of the codes.
Mr. Myers.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Scott Meyer on behalf of your Wyoming Community Banks, the Wyoming Bankers Association. We don't oppose this bill either. I will tell you that, I guess, in answering the question presented by Representative Chestik, is that is exactly what it does. It's for rewards, it's for monitoring whatever kind of inventory that they may want to do in a global sense, not on specific things. Our banks they issue their own credit cards. They don't issue these codes. The codes are signed. They don't have any reports that they receive. They don't have any kind of wherewithal. And I think, as Ms. Franks just mentioned, I think our biggest concern at the time when it was first come out is that we did not want to be held liable for something that we have absolutely no control over. That has been fixed in the last, in the amendments. So I think as the way it stands now, and I have not read anything regarding the criminal sanctions, but I do believe that the way it stands now, we don't have any opposition to it.
Mr. Representative Jennings.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Myers, and Ms. Frank, I have two questions for you that you brought up. One, the criminal activity, it's for a constitutional activity, and so I think it rises. But can you answer, are there other data mishandling or things like that would rise to a criminal level? Say you sold information and it went out worldwide. Would that not rise to a criminal level? Or could it not rise to a criminal level? And Ms. Frank, you brought up a second thing that's kind of interesting to me. So this code is turned off in Wyoming, and I go shoot prairie dog, well, no, not our state prairie dog, but wild pigs in Texas. And I go to Walmarts in Texas, even though I'm a Wyoming and my credit card is right here. Would I then be tracked, say it was turned on in another state? So how does that work crossing state lines if it's turned on in one? And I mean, it looks to me like you'd still capture the citizen. Is that, am I looking at that correctly?
Do you know?
Mr. Chairman, that's a $1 million question. First of all, you can shoot all the prairie dogs you want, as far as I'm concerned. Second, I think that there are discussions currently happening related to that interstate issue. I can't answer that for you today. We'd be happy to look into it. Mr. Meyer is the legal sitting among us, so he may be able to answer it better than I can.
Mr. Meyer.
Mr. Chairman, I think that that's a very interesting question and proposition, because I do believe that if you were some of the states that begin with C have, or mandating that these codes be used. And if you wanted to go shop in Longmont or Loveland at some of those sporting goods that also have offices in Nebraska, I believe that those codes would be tracked as well. And so it would maybe behoove maybe the Chamber of Commerce to say shop local. Other than that, I don't know the answer.
Briefly.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. How about the other part of the constitutionality? I mean, this rises to, this is a constitutionally protected activity. Are there any other, like, say, data, would that rise to a criminal level? If you misuse of that data collection, could it rise to a criminal level?
Mr. Meyer, do you have a position on that?
Mr. Chairman, could it? I suppose it could. I couldn't come up with any examples right now, but.
Mr. Chairman, if I may just follow up to that question as well. Most likely, I also cannot give you an example. I think our concern with the criminal provision is just how complicated this payment network process is and where your local financial institutions may get caught in a web inadvertently, even though they don't have the authority to affect the code.
Very good. Thank you both for being here this morning. Any further witnesses on Senate File 105? We're at 20 minutes after 8, so we need to pick up the pace here, and please tell us specifically what your concerns are with the bill.
Chairman Walsh and members of the committee, thank you for being here. To be succinct, I support this bill, and from Mr. Jones and the previous three speakers, I agree with everything they say. As far as companies coding and tracking what we buy for their inventory, I have no problem with that, but city, county, state, and federal governments, in my opinion, have no business knowing what I buy, whether it's potato chips, meat, car, clothing, guns, whatever it is. It's the companies need to know that for their inventory. But as far as the government, sorry, don't trust them.
Fair enough. Did you state your name for the record?
Oh, gosh,
Please.
sorry. Steve, Amelia, Cheyenne, Wyoming. My apologies, sir.
You have a green light?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Fred Schlachter, 50-year resident of Cheyenne. I got here in '72 with the U.S. Air Force, and speaking on and in favor of the bill. There's an old expression, common sense isn't so common sometimes. This seems like a common sense bill to me. The only thing I would add is I'm very much in favor of adding the criminal penalty as well. Thanks very much for your time.
Questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Here this morning. Other witnesses on Senate File 105? No one else in the room? Do you have anybody on Zoom for 105?
Mr. Chairman, we have Laura Pearson. She's in the room. If she could turn on her microphone. and
Please
camera.
bring Laura in.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
I can. Please state your name for the record and briefly tell us what you'd like us to know.
My name is Laura Tolliver Pearson. I am in Southwest Wyoming. In the private sector, I am a gun owner and purchaser. I would ask for an aye vote on this bill. I fully believe that the government is trying to track us and track the firearms that we purchase. And as far as a criminal penalty, I would be in favor of that. But if that is going to hinder this bill being passed, then maybe not. But we need something in place in Wyoming that protects firearms purchasers from being tracked. Thank you for accepting my testimony.
We appreciate you being here. Any questions? Thank you for taking the time to be with us this morning. Anyone else on?
Thank you.
No one else? No one else in the room? We're going to close public comment committee. What's your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Moved by Representative Rodriguez-Williams, second by Representative Jennings. Amendments. Any proposed amendments? Representative Jennings.
Chairman, I'd like to move the criminal penalty, and if I get a second, I'll explain why.
Is there a second? Representative Rodriguez-Williams, second. Go ahead, Representative.
So, Mr. Chairman, I look at a couple of things that are happening here. One, we're bound to protect the people of Wyoming. And this is it's one of the few constitutional things where we could and it should rise to a higher level of protection. So from testimony, I see that there was other data collection that if they were nefarious, if it turned into something bad, that also, we were told, could rise to a criminal level. So I don't know why we would carve this out and not put this penalty in. I think this is a good place to start. It strengthens the constitutional activity of not worrying about having data collected. I think it behooves us to protect our constitutional activities at an even higher level. So that's why I'm moving it.
Further discussion. Representative Craigle.
Maybe a question for the bringer of the amendment. Would you be willing to look at actually making it a felony? I mean, putting real teeth in it, because I don't think the language that we have on this written amendment does that.
Representative Jennings.
So somewhere down the line, I think that might be a good conversation to have, but I think at the very beginning of this, to give it a little bit of time, I think we'd be better off to start out at making it a criminal at a lower level. I don't think that our Wyoming people are going to rise to this level, our credit unions and our banks, I don't think. And so I think it would probably be better to come back and revisit that if we start having a problem. But I do think the criminal part would be okay. So while I wouldn't necessarily, personally, I'd be okay with that. But I don't think it's necessary to start out there on this bill at that level.
Representative Craigle, all, nothing? Further questions? Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I think I'm on the side of we often pass laws without teeth in them, and I find that to be unfortunate at times, but I think this is one potentially where we have a change where if we pass this amendment, I guess, committee, what I'll be asking for is potentially rolling this out a little bit further, because I think what I'd like to see is if we pass this and then we hear that no one's following it, then at that point, then we're talking about, do we put more teeth in that and severity? But I think we heard from our banks that they want to work with us. So I would hesitate to throw this in while we're kind of making sure that this is working. Let's hear that it's failing and talk about penalties at that point.
Representative Craigle.
So I guess my question for bringing this up, and my point is if we're going to put any criminal penalty in, then it might as well be what we think the penalty ought to be. Otherwise, we don't do any penalty. Because if we're not having a problem, we can put a penalty in it, criminal penalty in at any time. So my preference is either we do no penalty or we do one that actually has teeth. But let's not just make a statement with some misdemeanor. If we're going to protect our Second Amendment right, let's do it right. Or let's just say we don't think this is a problem right now and we leave it out. That's where I'm getting.
Further discussion on the amendment? Saying none. All those in favor of Representative Jennings' motion that we add the criminal actions on your handout, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. That motion has failed. Further amendments? Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the engrossed copy, page 7, line 9, I'd like to change the may to shall. The Attorney General shall pursue an injunction.
Is there a second? Page 7, line 9, second by Representative Jennings. Discussion on the amendment. Representative Rodriguez-Williams. You want to
I
explain?
urge and I vote. Again, we're talking about teeth. Although we know where our AG stands right now, AGs are not elected. They're appointed by the governor. They sit at the pleasure of the governor. And so this is obviously going in our green books, and our AGs are going to change over time. I urge and I vote.
Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I urge a no vote. This isn't about This is about discretion to pursue things when there's enough proof. We even have in there alleged to be in violation of this act. The word alleged is key there. The may isn't so they can willy-nilly choose which they're going to pursue. It's to give them the discretion to do their job. So I don't think it's appropriate to do shall. I think it should be may.
Further discussion on the motion? Representative Kriegel?
And maybe this is a friendly amendment, I don't know where I'm going to be on the amendment, but I also wonder down on line 11, if you're going to put shall for Attorney General, do you also want to put the court shall order an injunction instead of may?
Representative Shestak, did I hear a comment down there?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would absolutely oppose that friendly amendment. You can't tell a court what to do. The court, even though it does, there's a qualifier on 12, as the court may consider appropriate, telling a court it must do something is not the job of the legislature.
Representative Rodriguez-Williams on the friendliness of the comment?
I will leave it with just the may, or the changing the may to the shall on line 9, and if the good country lawyer would like to bring a second amendment, I would entertain that.
Okay, let's move along then. The amendment, no. There was a question. This is the motion. The motion is to change may to shall on page 7, line 9. Everybody clear on what we're voting on? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No, that fails. Further amendments? Further discussion? Sensing an urge to vote, Debbie, please call the roll on Senate File 105.
Representative Chestik,
No.
Representative Kriegel.
Aye.
Representative Haroldson,
Aye.
Representative Jennings, Representative Nemec,
Aye.
Representative Oakley,
Aye.
Representative Provenza, Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Aye.
And Chairman Weschuk.
Aye.
We have a total of 8 ayes and 1 no.
Senate File 105 do pass. You want to carry it on the floor? No? Who wants to carry it on the floor? Representative Haroldson. All right. Brings us now to Senate File 99, next one up. All right. Senator Bouchard, Senate File 99. Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Would you like me to go through the bill first, or should I give my pitch on what we're doing here?
It's your bill. You help us get started here.
Well, Mr. Chairman, the reason that this bill is so vital is there are children that are being harmed. All the way down to from 3 years old, there are children that are saying, like little Johnny saying, "Oh, Mommy, I think I'm a girl." And they're actually starting at a young age to start moving them over. And this is just bizarre. We didn't have this 20 years ago. This has been a big push from the left. And it just seems to me they want to sterilize children. They want to disrupt our society. Links to cultural Marxism on what's going on with this. You know, you're going to hear testimony from, and by the way, members of the committee, we've done this. This is the second year over in the other house, and we've heard, the opposition. So I just wanted to let you know that you're going to hear things like, "Well, we don't do it in Wyoming." But, you know, they did the same thing in Missouri. They testified the same exact way, said, we don't do it in Missouri. And then what happened is whistleblowers came out, exposed what was going on to where the Attorney General had to investigate. So, I mean, we've seen it before. It's the same pattern. You're going to see these, there's medical providers that are saying they, again, they're even going to tell you that they don't do it here. Why are they defending it? Why are they saying we can't do this law if we're not doing it here? You know, there is actual audio that's online that you can hear from a doctor in another state talking to their medical board, saying that there's big money in this. And I would contend that's what's going on here. This is a form of child trafficking into the medical system where people are making money. And in the end, we have people like this reason this bill is named Chloe's Law is because Chloe is the inspiration for this bill. She's been traveling the country. They did a double mastectomy on her as a teenager. There was another girl that came in last year. Her name was Luca, and they did a double mastectomy on her. And these girls have deep voices. Their bone structures have changed from the testosterone. There's irreversible damage. They weren't ready to make a decision like this in their life. That's what this bill is about. These children don't know what they want to do tomorrow, yet we're letting them make these decisions, and the medical community is coming in and saying, oh, it's great. There's just too much wrong with this. If they want to do that, let them wait till they're 18 years old, Mr. Chairman. This is very important that we protect these children. You've seen the case, the Montana parents at the DFS took the kids, sent them to Casper. I mean, that was in the news, national news. They told us it wasn't happening. They also told us that last year, and then right after that, the Rock Springs event came up where Rock Springs had been working with a child behind the backs of the parents. So we know it's happening. This is a national push. It's happening here in this state. You're going to hear people speak against this. There is a movement to keep this process in place for these kids to change their sex. Some of these, look, and I handed out a flyer. Those are kids, you can see there's a picture on one side where they're one sex, and then you can see on the picture where they're trying to transition these young kids. And I've said this is an evil form of child abuse. And I mean, I just can't stress enough, Mr. Chairman, how important this bill is.
Very good. Let's walk through the bill now.
So what this bill does is prohibits providers from performing procedures on children for gender transitioning or gender reassignment. As we go to page 2, there's definitions: child, what a child is; healthcare provider, what a healthcare provider; physician. As we go on to page 3, it's basically where it starts out. On page 7 is the most important part. No physician or healthcare provider shall. And then basically we're going to start going through the definitions here. These are the medical definitions. Starting on line 10, you can see castration is listed there amongst everything else. If you guys don't know what those are, there's things like artificial penis, artificial vaginas. That's what some of these definitions are. They can't perform mastectomies. This goes all the way down into the chemical and hormone treatments, because once we do this to these children, their voices change. The body's not made. I mean, if a body is born one sex, it's not made to receive the hormones of the opposite sex. And when it does, it causes damage that could be not, unreversible, especially in the cases of taking a young girl, giving her these hormones and making her sterile, because they're supposed to be in developing, and now we're trying to shut it down. So anyway, that I would urge against any amendments to take the chemical and puberty blocking and the hormone therapies. I would, please do not, or please resist any amendments to take that out. You're gonna have people tell you that that's not important. This is the most important part of this bill. As we keep going through the bill on page 4, we have medical carve-outs if you have a disorder with a chromosome disorder. And then on the bottom, you'll see on page 4, starting on line 19, that is basically early puberty. So this is so that way, this came out of testimony last year in committee where we have some children that have early puberty. So they use that drug to kind of get a handle on that. So that's making sure that the medical community can still use these things. We're not trying to box them out for the proper use of those drugs. As we go on to page, sorry, Mr. Chairman, I think I wrote over my page number, page 5. We have disciplinary actions. And what this is conforming language for the different providers, starting on page 5. If you flip over to page 6, you'll see more conforming language. These are just different licenses in the health field. And as you go to page 7, obviously we're making these procedures illegal in Wyoming, but if you go to page 7, you can see the board may refuse to renew and may revoke. So this bill is almost a little soft at this point, but I want to stress that the most important part of this bill is we're making it illegal. And so with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Senator, I see nurses and pharmacists specified here. Where do we have language on the penalty phase for the physician?
Mr. Chairman, the last one is actually, Mr. Chairman, 3541001, where it says for violating on page 6 on 19, well, right below that, you'll see 3326402. That's actually where they're placed. It doesn't say it, Mr. Chairman, but that's where they're placed if you look in code.
Very good. Further questions? Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just very briefly, what state was it that they performed surgery on Chloe?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Oakley, that was in California. And it was a major provider, Kaiser Permanente. They've done like 100 in just that one location. I also want you to know that in Indiana, where similar things have happened, they passed similar legislation to this, and the federal courts have upheld that it can stand, the state can prohibit the providers from doing these kind of actions.
Further questions for Senator Representative Provenza? Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize to cut there. It's really not a follow-up, but I'm just wondering, since you've been a part of this the whole way through, what has been the discussion on how this fits in with Article 1, Section 38 of our Constitution that says the parent, guardian, or legal representative shall have the right to make healthcare decisions for that person? Has that, been discussion around that?
Senator. Mr. Chairman, Representative Oakley, well, it's amazing that we go to do a constitutional amendment. I mean, we don't let parents do bad things to kids. And so if they wanted to just arbitrarily do other surgeries, it also says in that same part of the Constitution that the legislature reserves the right to make changes.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I have a question about circumcision. 'Cause that would be in some ways, has to do with gender and has to do with surgical mutilation of a penis. So is there concern that that's going to ban that sort of treatment? Or are you opposed to that?
Senator, circumcision.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, this bill has nothing to do with circumcision, which would be something that could be done for either religious reasons or other reasons that a parent decides to. But if they were doing something for the gender change, that's a totally different thing. That's what this bill is about. It's not about normal procedures.
Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just finally, so this is a lot about, this bill is completely about physiological change. Would you agree that it is a recognized mental condition?
Senator.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Oakley, I think that's where we're missing the boat. I think that the mental health community is also making money. They're making a lot of money on this moving. Everybody's making money. If you look at from the time they start the counseling, and that was the testimony that we have received from two girls in the Senate when we received their direct testimony, is that they were whisked through a process on the counseling side, which should have been maybe 3 years or some level of let's let them grow up and maybe grow out of such, as they called confusion, as the medical communities has called it, as confusion. Why don't we let these kids grow up and possibly grow out of it? Why don't we give them counseling and let's slow the roll? I think that's where we really missed the boat. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I feel about it. I think we went too far.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, so as I've been contemplating this bill, for several days now, one of the questions that's really rolling around in my head, because I like the bill. Like, I'm supportive of what you're trying to do. But one of the things that's really been rolling around in my head is, and you mentioned this, there are, to say it's not happening in Wyoming is just, at least the surgery part may not be happening in Wyoming, but there are other things, the treatments, et cetera. If there are kids, we have kids that have already started down that path. What do we do with them once this bill becomes law? How do we deal with them? Do we say you're not allowed to get any treatment? We're not allowed to continue your treatment. You're going to have to go elsewhere. What are your thoughts on that? And is there a way to deal with that? Because those, at this point, I'm concerned about those kids and how we affect them with this legislation.
Senator.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Crago, I don't think we can throw the baby out with the bathwater, obviously, but there's a real issue here. This either has to be legal or it has to be illegal. We can't have it both ways. There will be other kids that fall through the cracks if we leave a door open for children to somehow be damaged by these kind of procedures.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman, sorry. Senator, so I'm not talking about surgery. I'm talking, because I think that's either happened today or it hasn't. I'm talking about some of the hormonal treatments that we're talking about within the bill. What do we do with those kids? How do we get them off, right? I don't think you can just, I don't understand this, and I'm gonna have to ask a doctor when they come up here, is if they've started those treatments, how do we get them off those treatments? Which I'm okay with, but that means continued treatment. I don't know if you can just say, bam, you're done. I'm guessing there's some pretty severe damages that would occur by doing that too. So that's kind of what I'm talking about, is how do we make that happen?
Senator, if you know.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Crago, I've done a deep dive into this, and I'm going to tell you there are children that just totally said, hey, I'm walking away and I'm detransitioning. And when they do an abrupt stop, and it's very fortunate for them that some of them have caught it early enough. So it's good for them. The ones that didn't catch it early enough still have a deep voice, or they have other changes that they're going to have to surgically undo. And all I can say is that if we make it illegal, even the ones that have started it, maybe they may have to go to another state. We have to put our foot down here and say we're not going to do this to children. I've handed you those pictures of those young children. Who's going to save them? Those little ones don't have a voice. The only ones that we've had voices are the ones that are teenagers that went, wow, why did we do this? Why didn't somebody tell me that I couldn't change back? Why didn't somebody tell me that I'd have health problems, that it's a lifetime of medical care if I stay on this road? So we have to save these kids, and you're not going to please everybody. We know that from politics now, right? We vote on things up or down, and we're not going to please everyone. This is a place where this state has to do like other states have done and taken a hard stance and say it's illegal here.
Follow up?
So Senator, have any other states put like a grandfather clause in their bills?
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, the last bill that I really tracked in, which was very similar to this, almost identical, other than the nuances of the state laws are different, so they, different places and place cards in the bill. Interesting, no, there was no such thing on that bill, and that bill has held up to federal court and is still in place.
Representative Craig will follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I understand the last one, which state was that, Senator?
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, it was Representative Crago, it was Indiana.
Follow up. So I guess just a little bit deeper dive, as you said, you've been in this issue for a long time. Any other states other than Indiana that, because multiple states have enacted that, have any of those states done something like a grandfather clause, i.e. give some time frame to get off the treatments once the bill became law?
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Crago, so with all the pushback that I've heard that we're not doing it here anyway, I don't think this is an issue on this bill in this state.
One more.
Have any other states put a grandfather clause? I'm just curious. I just am wondering.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Crago, I'm not tracking that. Like I'm telling you, this bill has been specific for Wyoming, and I've heard from the medical community over and over, we're not doing it. This bill is specific to Wyoming. I haven't tracked what other states are doing on grandfather clauses.
All right. I know we have other legislators in the room. I'm going to urge you not to testify, simply in the interest of time. If you feel that you absolutely must testify, please keep those comments brief. But any other legislators in the room needing to testify on Senate File 99 this morning?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief so that we allow other comment. It was already mentioned, this is happening in Wyoming. We had a discussion on the floor about, oh, well, it's only happening to adults, and that was later confirmed by UW that it is happening with children in some of our tax-supported institutions. As far as the topic of gender affirmation care, this really is the practice of ignoring the real issue. The underlying conditions of gender dysphoria are generally in the anxiety and the depression realm. These are symptoms of something that is bigger. Let's take the idea of, say I had someone come into me and they're telling me that they are too fat, and I can visibly see that this individual is too thin. Their body mass index is low. If I immediately affirm that person and say, you're right, you are too fat. Let's put you on Ozempic. Let's get you on weight loss management drugs. And maybe if this looks like it's doing well, we can get you on the road to a gastric bypass. We don't do that with things like anorexia, thank heavens, because we recognize that there's an underlying issue here. And that's what we need to continue with. We need to stop medicalizing the bodies of our children and first recognize that we have mental health treatment of utmost importance. In fact, I'll quote a study that just came out in January. They say it is of utmost importance to identify and appropriately treat mental disorders in adolescents experiencing gender dysphoria to prevent suicide. I will stand for questions. Thank
You
you.
mentioned they said, so who is they in that quote that you just gave us?
The quote, it's published in the British Medical Journal, a Finnish study that is actually one of the best. They followed study participants for over 6 years, which is about as long as it has ever been. We talk about, we have all this data that supports this. That is false. We do not. I think that there's going to be more testimony on this, and if you want more information or a copy of this, I'm happy to provide that.
Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Briefly, but you would agree, as listed in the DSM-5, that this is a medical condition, a mental medical condition?
Representative Penn.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Representative Oakley, it is a diagnosis, yes. Should it come with other diagnoses as well, such as what I mentioned, anxiety and depression that are the underlying? Let's get to the root here, and let's treat the root cause.
Thank you. Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Chairman Washut. I appreciate the time. I'll too be brief and hope I don't say anything that hasn't already been said. We're living in a day of deception. We all know that no one has been able to change a male into a female or a female into a male. We are setting these children up for a hope that is misguided. Excuse me, Senator Hutchings, Senate District 5, Mr. Chair, sorry about that. We're setting them up for years of pain, misery, and a lifelong medical treatments. To answer Representative Kragel's question about the puberty blockers, I've talked to 2 of these people that have decided to stop their transition phase, and they both told me that when you start them on the puberty blockers, there are milestones that these children are missing, and the sooner they can stop, the better. We don't want someone to go through years 13 to 21 on puberty blockers and miss a milestone they can never get back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, committee. Scott Heiner, House District 18. I think we all believe that it's the longstanding tradition that states help protect our children. We have laws about alcohol. We have laws about tobacco, drugs. We have many laws on the books that protect our children. And I think this law, if enacted, would do the same. Being a father of 7 children, I've seen how puberty is very difficult for some as they transition and the hormones affects their bodies. Growing up, I had a sister that she was classified as a tomboy. I had to hide my toys from her because she'd rather play with my toys than with her girls' toys. She is now a mother and a grandmother, and it worked out very well for her to wait. That's what this bill is all about. It's not prohibiting, it's just asking these children to wait until they're of the age of maturity. I was personally involved with an individual that waited until, at the time, he was into his 20s before he made that transition to a woman. I had many conversations with him before as we talked about the long-lasting implications, as he studied this out in his mind and with his friends and with his family. There was open discussions about it before he transitioned to a she. I had many conversations with she after the fact. But this was a decision that they made at the time of maturity. It was not something that was made when they were young and going through those puberty and those difficult times of a youth. The most important thing about this bill, in my mind, is the drugs. That can have long-lasting effects on bone density, on optic nerves, European nations have put the brakes or have tapped the brakes on the drugs. And that's, I think, in my mind, that's the most important part about this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any state agencies in the room wishing to testify on Senate File 99? State agencies? Any on Zoom? All right, so we have about an hour, and we're going to allow 20 minutes of testimony from the public in opposition to the bill and 20 minutes in favor of the bill. Not 20 minutes each, but 20 minutes for each side. And I wish I could provide more time, but this is the last week of a short budget session, and today's the last day to get these bills out of committee. And so we're going to start with those who want to speak in opposition to the bill. We'll take 20 minutes of testimony. So I encourage those in the room who wish to testify, let's get the most impactful testimony first. And keep your testimony as brief and on point as possible. Okay? Vice Chair, will you keep the clock? And we'll pause if necessary if we get long-winded questions as well. So let's begin. Introduce yourself, have the green light.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Tell us what you want to say here.
Committee. My name is Dr. Joseph Horam, Horam. I'm a pediatrician here in Cheyenne and have been practicing for 30 years. I would like to address some concerns that we have. There is really an evidence-based process to assessing children, adolescents with gender dysphoria. Bring that forward first as a fellow of the American Academy of Pediatrics. I'm one of 67,000 pediatricians in that organization. It represents the highest level of evidence-based guidelines, policy, research that's provided on a national and international level. It is the highest level of standard of care for pediatrics in the country. Sure, there's other components to that, but that is a major driver. And I would like to contrast that with the American College of Pediatricians. The AAP was set up in 1930, again, representing 67,000, almost all pediatricians in the nation. The American College of Pediatricians was established in 2002 with about 700 active physicians, and their main kind of point is that they are ideological and establish an opposition to gender dysphoria. And so in the event that you're hearing about either one of these organizations, I want you to understand there is some evidence-based standards of care that I represent. I'd also like to make a comment about the discrimination aspects. I see each patient on a one-to-one basis, and I cannot discriminate against somebody who truly has early evidence of changes in their gender identity process. We all go through a certain component of that as developing children and adolescents. Most of us do fine, but a very significant segment of the populace has transgender disorder. That is real and needs to be managed. I cannot discriminate and say, well, because there's a law in the state of Wyoming, I'm going to ignore that. And we have to have a process to be able to put individuals through an essential evaluation. That includes therapists, that includes other specialists, pediatricians, other doctors, family, to, over time, make a very complex determination. And I would say, in general, less than 1% of the populace has a true transgender leaning, and some of that, a smaller percentage of that, requires gender affirmation changes in the way of, we've talked about surgical, well, that's even something for Wyoming as probably not going to happen, okay? My personal opinion is it shouldn't happen under age 18. But let's put that aside. Medical affirmation, yes, that has occurred. A lot of times it originates out of academic centers in the surrounding states, out of Denver, out of Salt Lake City, out of Billings. These children come to us under treatment, and I'm co-managing them as a result of that. Are there some that are initiated in the state of Wyoming? Yes, but they're a small number. Lastly, I would like to say the bill is somewhat incomplete in the sense that it puts physicians in conflict. I can't determine that some of these particular cases are in the milieu of puberty and hormone disorders that are going to be subject to some scrutiny. And do physicians have a sense of confusion, a sense of despair that we may lose our license just because we're practicing medicine in the way that we think is properly conducted? And some of the disorders that are listed in the bill, like the congenital disorders at birth, like the precocious puberty, well, that's just a small segment. There's a large list, and we need to have a bill that addresses a further spectrum of those disorders to allow for physician comfort and taking a comprehensive look at practicing medicine. Lastly, and my only other point is that this is affecting physician recruitment in the state of Wyoming. And we're going to have less and less interest in those doctors, and this is a national competition to get doctors into any given state. This will be a factor that says, well, one less obstacle I want to take on. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Question? Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Doctor, for coming today and testifying. I appreciate it. You said this is going to cause an issue with recruitment, and I don't know, maybe I'm seeing it wrong, but I almost think in some ways it might relieve some of these pediatricians who are walking in saying, I don't have to make that decision, I don't have to make that call, because at this point, this is going to be something we're going to walk them through on a mental health level, and at the age of 18, they can make those decisions themselves. I don't know, could you speak to that? I believe there's probably two sides to that coin.
Mr. Chairman?
Doctor?
Yes, I think for the vast majority of pediatricians, I think really they recognize that there has to be an allowance to take children and adolescents through a diagnostic process. And I think that's what we need to be able to be comfortable with. Yes, some will just require mental health. I understand that. But there are some intrinsic to their physiologic development. They have sex identity disorders that are inborn. And most pediatricians want to see those individuals get the maximal level of care and the less intrusive level of care. Thank you.
Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a couple questions. You mentioned gender dysphoria. So it is a recognized medical condition. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman? That is correct, and I'll defer to a psychiatrist next to me to answer that.
Okay.
Representative Oakley.
We haven't talked about this. I'm interested in the pharmacists and nurses being included in this, because when I look at it, I mean, you'd agree that they can either perform surgery or prescribe drugs. Wouldn't that be accurate?
Doctor?
Mr. Chairman, could you clarify that question?
Nurses and pharmacists.
So nurses and pharmacists are included in this bill, and I'm interested in when you're looking at saying you can't do surgeries and you can't prescribe drugs, then isn't it true that nurses and pharmacists can do neither of those?
Doctor?
Mr. Chairman, I do believe it's a collaborative care. Nurses, as in nurse practitioners, are in the primary care lane. Pharmacists, of course, are prescribing. So in that regard, on the medical affirmation side, they would be involved. I would agree that on the surgical side, that would not be related.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doctor, thanks for being here. Could you walk us through maybe the malpractice, how it works if someone says that they maybe were victims of negligence or medical malpractice? What does that look like? And does that system maybe adequately provide mechanisms or pathways for remedies?
Doctor?
I must say I'm not really prepared to answer that question. I do think we have a system in place that looks at what constitutes harm to a patient, what constitutes the proper standard of care delivered by a physician or a provider, and I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. The other gentleman at the table want to testify?
I was playing baseball here. So my name's Dr. Clark. I'm a neurologist at CRMC. I'm also a WWAMI graduate and proud, basically lifelong Wyoming resident. I'm here with my colleagues to speak about this bill because I think it has a lot of ramifications. Firstly, I would like to express a little bit of professional offense at the language and motivation of this bill, just because I feel like I sat through that presentation and myself and my colleagues have all been accused of sort of being child abusers and child traffickers and doing all these terrible things. Obviously, as doctors, we have the care for the patient at heart. That is the thing that we are most motivated by at all times. And that is part of the reason why we are here to talk to you today. We do not do things to patients that we think are bad for them, that will harm them. And it is our duty as professionals, and it is a large part of what we do in the clinic, to make sure that the decisions that we make, that the treatments that we recommend, and the joint decision-making that happens between patients, families, and providers is evidence-based, is safe, and is the appropriate treatment for that specific patient. A lot of that conversation has to happen in a very private and very personal and very unique set of circumstances, because you don't come up with the same answer every time. There are 4 trans medicine guidelines. There are guidelines ethically and medically that we have developed as a profession that is the result of decades of research, hundreds of hours of experts, international experts meeting and trying to determine what is the best practice. The second component to this, so we already have a strong background in terms of what is appropriate, what is safe and justifiable medically, as well as a good understanding of the science behind it and what happens. The second component to this is I'm concerned about this bill specifically because of the lack of context. It does not seem to me that the speakers so far have had much of an opportunity to speak with people who have successfully transitioned, who are happy with their transition, which is the vast majority of the people who are treated for these conditions. There is certainly a few vocal minorities who it did not go well, but that can be said for any medical treatment and any surgery that someone may undergo. So to that point, if you have someone who is a child who has to think about getting treatment for cancer, that can be quite horrific from the outside view. The radiation, the surgery, the medications, what it looks like you are putting that child through can be very horrible taken out of context. And it may be after the fact that that child did not have a good outcome and that child and that family comes to a public outlet and makes that their story. But that really does not represent the people who have gone through something taken out of context, which might seem horrifying, come out on the other side. That child has outlived their cancer and is now living a happy life. They are in a better place. That I think is something that has to be taken into account. The third thing that I will say just on a more personal level is I do think that the people of Wyoming, the state of Wyoming, very highly values self-determination. And I think that is true in people's personal lives. I think that is true for parents making decisions about their children. And I think that is where it should stay. Thank you.
Questions? Doctor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Justin Romano. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist who's been practicing here at the Cheyenne Children's Clinic for the past 8 months or so. I'm in somewhat of a unique position to talk on the mental health side of this because in my residency and training program, I had a transgender adolescent clinic where I worked directly with mostly teens who were transgender, some of them getting hormone replacement therapy, others who were not. And in the 8 months that I've been working here in Cheyenne, I've already encountered about a dozen or so young people who have been transgender, who are transgender, some of them who want hormone replacement, some of them who do not. My main point that I want to make today is that I am here to be an advocate for those young people and express to you their opinions and decisions. And that when we look at the numbers and the data, the recommendations from thousands of worldwide experts on hormone replacement therapy, on gender-affirming care, it's that gender-affirming care in young people does decrease the rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide. And I think preventing people from getting gender-affirming care will likely raise the suicide rate for young people in Wyoming. And I think the loss of life of anyone that is preventable would be a tragedy. Everything in medicine is a risk versus reward. We talked about people who have detransitioned or gone back, stopped taking the medicines that have been provided to them. Right now, the best estimates that we have is that's only about 2 or 3% of people. That the vast majority of people who do get on puberty blockers, hormone replacement therapy, transition successfully and enjoy it. And even those 2 people who don't, or who do go back, who do detransition, most of them don't regret their decision to take those medicines in the first place. It's a journey. They're trying to understand themselves, and they're trying to figure out what this life is about and what they are about. So that was the main point I wanted to make. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions? Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. Just a brief question. Can you tell me whether or not there's a requirement for a full psychological evaluation before starting a patient on puberty blockers, specifically underage minor?
Doctor?
Yes, absolutely. Usually, in most cases, and in our case, in Cheyenne Children's Clinic, we mostly refer people down to the True Clinic at Denver Children's, and they do a full psychological evaluation just to make sure that everything is appropriate and following the guidelines.
All right. Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is somewhat of a follow-up on that. So whatever we do, though, you'd say it's important that we can provide psychological and psychiatric care to these children.
Doctor?
Mr. Chairman, yes, it is very important to address these issues.
Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you guys for coming today. I'd like to dissect this just a little bit off of where we're going with this, just to kind of see where we're headed. I think I direct it to you, sir. So I have a child, and we talk a lot about transitioning from male to female. But in this world of all kinds of mental dysphorias, I think is what you called it, have you seen anything in your practice, or have you seen anything where somebody wants to transfer, I don't know, to the richest man in the world, or a dog, or a tree, or, I mean, where else does this go? Do you have those patients that come in and say, you know, I'd like to become a cat, or I'd like to become, and how would you deal with that? If you're only dealing with male to female or female to male, surely there's other dysphorias out there. How do you deal with those? Doctor?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And thank you for the question, Representative Jennings. Absolutely not. I have not had young people come in saying they want to be cats, saying they want to be trees. Most people take this matter very seriously. In the field of psychiatry, we generally understand that gender identity starts forming around 4 years old. So a lot of times people say like, oh, you're too young to be thinking about this. Oh, you shouldn't be thinking about that. But this is something that makes up someone's identity. This is something that is very important to young people. And there are not litter boxes in schools. People are taking this very seriously, and they want to get help for something that they feel like is very important and a big part of their lives.
Representative Provenza.
If I could add to that.
Yep.
As a neurologist, I would just speak to that as well. There are some biochemical underpinnings of sex hormones that change functions in the brain, such that there is not a cat or tree part of the brain that is activated, but brain activity does change in the presence of different kinds of sex hormones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Romano, could you maybe speak to the difference between maybe body dysmorphia and gender dysmorphia, just for understanding? Thank you.
Doctor?
Yes, that's an excellent point. Yes, gender dysphoria is your gender identity causing you to feel prolonged feelings of sadness. But there's also gender incongruence, which I think is an important definition. I've met a lot of young trans kids who have gender incongruence. Their gender identity issues do not cause sadness, do not cause depression, do not cause anxiety. They just feel like they belong in the wrong body, but otherwise they are well-adjusted, smart, caring young individuals. And then body dysmorphia is more along the lines of the eating disorders. And sometimes you see your body differently than what it really is, but we don't often talk about that too much in the gender incongruence argument.
Thank you, Representative Provenzio.
Thank you for that. And could you maybe speak to you mentioned suicidality, increased suicidality of not being able to access treatment. Are there other things that if put off, just other consequences, I guess, in not being able to access some of the medical affirming care?
Doctor?
The main thing that we have evidence for in the mental health side of things is depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. And those do not get better. You can treat them, but the thing that helps arguably the most is getting gender affirming care.
Okay, thank you. Others in the room wishing to testify in opposition to Senate File 99. Others in the room wishing to testify in opposition. We're up against the clock. So
I'm hurrying, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, committee, my name is Sarah Burlingame. I'm the Executive Director of Wyoming Equality, and we are in opposition to this bill. And we understand that, and I'm going to try to gallop through this because I really want you to get to hear from these parents who are directly affected by this and have, I think, pretty profound testimony to share. We would say that if you are going to pass this bill, that there are some amendments that you should consider. First, you need to change First, we would advise that you change the name of this bill. Right now, there are two other laws in the country that reference Chloe. One of them is in Missouri, and it's about genetic testing for heart disease. The other one is in Pennsylvania, and it's for genetic testing for Down syndrome. I think there's confusion, as well as the fact, of course, that this would break a precedent that we don't name bills in Wyoming for living people, and that might bump up against a single issue bill. Is this a bill to address a California resident, or is this a bill to address folks living here in Wyoming? So we would make that recommendation. We would also say, as you'll hear from these parents, that something needs to engage patients who are currently under doctor's care, and something that doesn't just do that steep drop-off and you may have heard from a sponsor that that was happening from people who detransition, that you could just go from having a dose of hormone blockers or puberty blockers and then just discontinue and be fine. I don't think that that is an accurate statement. And I think the young woman who came here from California to testify said one of the things that she struggled with was finding doctors who would walk through that with her. So that's a necessity, as well as folks who are coming from other states where this is legal. We need something that addresses that. We need to give our doctors the tools to work with all the patients that they see in front of them, regardless of what the rules in their states are. And then the only other thing I would say is that rather than amend this bill, I hope that you'll vote against it. And I hope that you'll vote against it because you've heard very clear testimony that has named the doctors in our state as being motivated by money, not the care of their patients. You've heard them called butchers. You've heard them referred to as people who don't live and work beside us and, raise their children in our communities and do their utmost to provide the highest level of care. Rather, you have heard that they are motivated by the mutilation of children. And I know that we all want to ironically take that surgeon's knife and cut that away and separate it. But I would suggest to you that that is the heart of this bill, that the cruelty and the contempt for the medical providers and for the families who seek this care have all been named specifically. And if you vote for this bill, you are telling those families, and you are telling those children, and you are telling our physicians and healthcare providers that we endorse that in the Wyoming legislature. And I think that's a hard pull for people who are working very hard to serve our families, who are working very hard to hit the highest professional standards. I'd stand for any questions, and I'd really hope that you wouldn't ask me any and we could get to our parents. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let's hear from the parents.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Judiciary Committee, thank you for giving me this brief opportunity to come and speak in regard to Senate File 99. My name is Michael Christofferson. I'm a proud Wyoming native. While Cheyenne has been my home for more than 3 decades, Green River was my first home. I'm proud graduate of the University of Wyoming, and even after 20 years of after graduating, anytime I hear the band start to play, I can't help but blurt out Ragtime Cowboy Joe. Perhaps a little bit louder and more obnoxious than most, and much to the embarrassment of my children. I tell you that today not because my history, or I believe my history, is unique. I'm in a room full of proud Wyomingites. But I want to tell you that because I'm not coming from an outside state trying to push a specific agenda. As proud as I may be of being of my Wyoming heritage, I'm even more proud of my legacy. I'm the proud father of 4 amazing teenagers. And as that father, I would like to come and speak today against Senate File 99. As I said earlier, I'm the proud father of 4 amazing teenagers, and it just so happens that one of those teenagers is trans. It was perhaps the proudest day of my life, the day that I got to sit in one of these committee rooms, shoulder to shoulder with my child, and speak against a previous piece of legislation, specifically against transgender children. Unfortunately, it seems to become an annual affair of me having to come here and speak and advocate for my child. But my child is worth advocating for, and so are my rights. And I want to tell you a little bit about my child. What the sponsors of this bill may obsess over, the fact that my child is trans, I want to focus on the fact that my child is goofy, incredibly smart, compassionate, a fierce advocate for those that can't advocate for themselves, loving of all people, hard-headed, perhaps a little bit like Dad, an extremely talented performer, currently playing 3 different instruments for their high school band. Contrary to what the sponsors of this bill would like you to believe, the day my child came out to me and my wife, we did not call and book the operating room. We didn't call and automatically put them on hormone replacement therapy or suppressants. This is a complicated health issue. It is not something that we as parents take lightly. But what we did do with our child when they came out to us was we told them, we love you. We love you as the person. We are your biggest cheerleaders, and we will always be there alongside you for your journey. So how about their health care? What did we decide in regard to the child's health care? The answer to that question is exactly what I want you to take away from my brief testimony. It's none of your business. The sponsors of this bill call it an act relating to public health and safety, which is a blatant lie. My child's health care has no bearing on the public's health and should not be up for discussion inside the walls of any level of government. It's a discussion that is had between the child, a qualified healthcare provider, me and my wife. And that is it. There is no other person, no other entity in that equation. The sponsors of this bill and those that back it will use scare tactics. They'll give you pictures of and call it mutilation. But this is more lies. What they will fail to tell you is that there are other forms of treatment that potentially could be altered and not be provided for my child. My child who may have been born with a uterus but identifies as a male, if they have horrible menstrual cycles, are they going to be allowed this hormone medication to treat that? I am aware that there are many members of this committee that are also parents of teenage children and other children, older and younger, even grandparents. These scare tactics work because we as parents are very protective of our children. But before you vote today, I would like you to take a moment and put yourself in my shoes. Rather than asking yourself if you as a parent would allow your child to go through this, I want you to ask yourself a different question. Is there any healthcare decision that you feel the government is more qualified to make than you as their parent? Absolutely not, which is why, and as the representative spoke earlier, the Constitution states the parent and guardian or legal representative of any other natural person shall have the right to make these healthcare decisions. Make no mistake, Senate File 99 is an attempt for the sponsors of this bill to limit healthcare and an attempt to limit the parent's ability to make these healthcare decisions. In closing, I want to thank members of this committee. So many of you have pledged over the years to fight against big government overreach and have fought to protect the rights of the parents. And from the very bottom of my heart, I want to thank you. But I'm here to ask you to do it yet again. As the good representative from Carbon County said, today we are seeing a strong surge in the belief that the government should be a controlling factor in our lives, a belief that government should delegate our standards or dictate our standards of living. It is a dangerous one. Systems around the world and throughout history have shown and continue to show the destruction of human freedom, liberty, and quality of life when the big hand of government inserts itself. As the sponsor of this bill said not long ago, we cannot have it both ways. Either you believe this body should be allowed to legislate healthcare and make decisions for your child, or it should not. And in closing, as the representative from Park County said not long ago, remember, we do not co-parent with the government. Again, I thank you for your time, and I do stand for any questions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you being here today. Questions? Thank you very much. Ma'am, do you want to say something as well?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chairman and Committee. My name is Abby Kircher. I'm a mother, an educator, a third-generation Wyomingite, and I'm here today in opposition of Senate File 99. I'm also here for the fellow moms who wanted to be here but don't have the capacity to fight. I've listened to Chloe's story. It's sad, and my heart goes out to her, but it happened to Chloe. It happened in another state. I'm here to testify on what my experience was with my child in Wyoming. As a parent of a non-binary child, now an adult, I want to be clear that this is an attack on my rights as a mother to make necessary healthcare decisions for my child. I'm quite frankly offended that this bill implies parents make life-altering decisions on a whim. When my child came to me and told me that they didn't feel comfortable in their gender, I as well did not run and go get surgery, all these crazy things. No, it was years of working together with our physicians, our pastor, our counselors, our child, to learn what was best medically and mentally for them. It was a team approach, and my child is now a thriving adult. Puberty blockers are simply a pause button that allow the time needed for maturity and discussion. Potential side effects are so minimal and rare, the benefits far outweigh the risk when you are dealing with a child in distress. These medications should not be categorized the same as surgery as it is in Senate File 99. Furthermore, I'd like to acknowledge the humility it takes to recognize our limitations. It is hard to admit when you don't have all the answers. I am grateful to the physicians and the mental health professionals that gave us the support that my family needed. These professionals have dedicated their lives to studying and understanding these issues. They provided medical guidance so that we, the parents, could make the best decisions for our child. Lastly, when my children were younger, we had discussions on the importance of keeping your privates private. We taught them boundaries about their bodies, and that the only people that should know anything about their privates are us as their parents, their doctors for medical reasons, and as they got older, their partner or their spouse. Legislators were never on that list. Please vote no on Senate File 99. I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. Questions? Appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we've exhausted the time I allocated for comments in opposition to Senate File 99. We'll begin now with 20 minutes of testimony in favor of Senate File 99. We'll start on the left and we'll work across. Please identify yourself and tell us what you want us to hear. Please be brief so others can testify as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Gary Brown. I stand in favor of this bill. This bill is designed to protect our children until they become mature adults. I was in the Senate committee when Chloe Cole testified. She told of how when she was 14 years old, she was targeted on social media and drawn into what she called, quote, the woke transgender culture. And how she was led into transgendering. I had the privilege of sitting and talking with Chloe in the House gallery, one-on-one, and I was horrified as she described the problems that she had that came from taking puberty blockers, or testosterone, and other chemicals, and how they affected her female body. It was painful for me as I listened to her as she conveyed what she went through as a child, having a double mastectomy. She told me that due to the effects of hormones, chemicals, and surgery, of the pain that she has and most likely will live with for the rest of her life. She told me the greatest regret is living with the fact that she will never, ever be able to have children. This is a decision that only should be made by adults for adults. They should make this when they are old enough to make this decision. We don't let children 10, 12, 14 years old decide to have a driver's license. And Mr. Chairman, I'm a strong Second Amendment advocate, but I would never consider handing a child a gun. Mr. Chairman, that's what we're doing with this. We are giving children loaded guns. Make no mistake, this is child abuse. These children need to have a time to be children. Children make changes in their lives every single hour. They don't know what they want to be. And to put a child in this position of changing their life forever when they're 3 and 4 years old, when they're 5 years old, when they're 10 years old, is abusive. We make laws in this country to protect our children. And we've made these laws to prevent child abuse. Why did we do it? We've heard of parents locking their children in closets, burning their children with cigarettes. And that's why we've made these laws, because we have to protect children. It's the duty of parents and adults to protect children from abuse. And it's your duty to protect children from abuse here today. Make no mistake, the people of Wyoming are watching you. And they're going to remember what happens here today. And they're going to remember what happens in this legislative session. Across this state, I've gotten emails because I've taken on this. And I've gotten emails from all across the state that they're watching. We want to see our children protected. When they become adults, if they want to do this, that's their decision. But we need to protect the children today. Thank you.
Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for allowing me to speak. I come from Salt Lake City. I'm a retired pediatrician. I am nervous because I've only testified once on this before the state legislature in Utah. I have the unenviable position of filling in for Dr. Miriam Grossman, the esteemed psychiatrist and author who generally testifies before Congress. She was going to be here today, but had to back out. I gave you a handout, but I have to say, On my drive over here, I changed my testimony a little bit, and after hearing the opponents, I'm glad I did. One year ago, our children's hospital hosted a speaker from out of state to promote what is called gender-affirming care. Never mind that Utah had just banned the practice. When she finished, a well-respected geneticist who had recently retired and who was one of my mentors during my residency program raised his hand, took the microphone, and asked, "But what does the evidence show?" This is the question that the state legislature here needs to ask and answer. What does the evidence show? And by evidence, I mean, what does it say about it's life-saving? What does it say about it's the standard? What does it say about children being born in the wrong body? These are the questions that need to be answered. The woman's presentation was completely devoid of any evidentiary content. It was just her opinions. She didn't even offer a bibliography. And Dr. Carey was correct to jump on it. And this is the question that countries all over Europe have been asking for the last several years. And they answer the question by evaluating the supposed evidence using what's called the systematic review of the literature. This is a well-established and internationally accepted way of grading each individual research paper for quality and reliability. They even use a tool called the GRADE system, an acronym that methodically scrutinizes hundreds and thousands of papers one at a time. And it's done by independent researchers, not people who have a vested interest in the subject. It's kind of like writing a paper. You don't hand it in to the professor and get an A. The professor scrutinizes the paper and decides what grade you get. And that's what these people do. So this is what European countries have been doing. Excuse me. And they have discovered that the papers are all D's and F's. Except it's worse than that. For example, here's the systematic review of the literature done by the United Kingdom called the CAS review. This portion of it is about hormones. They identified 1,995 publications. When they graded them, only 10 could even be graded. The other 1,985 had to be thrown out. They couldn't even be graded. They were worthless. They even had to throw out the papers from the Dutch researchers who originated the Dutch protocol. Those papers didn't even make the grade. There are 9, and let me just say this, some of you are attorneys. In a criminal trial, there's levels of evidence. There's poor evidence, there's good evidence. The systematic review of the literature is the pinnacle of evidence in research. Okay, so today there have been 9 European countries that have discontinued practices either completely or have drastically curtailed them. And many countries have shuttered their gender clinics. The latest was Germany just last week. And breaking news, the Dutch Parliament just last week announced that it is launching an investigation into their gender clinics. These are the clinics run by Dr. de Vries and her associates who generated the whole Dutch protocol upon which gender-affirming care is based. Holland is investigating it. So in my handout, I've talked about four unproven or disproven tenets of gender identity ideology. And I want to just go right to the one on suicide on the second page. Gender ideology insists that so-called affirming care is life-saving. This is categorically false. Such false claims are based on a plethora of small, short-term, uncontrolled studies with large numbers of loss to follow-up. These are the studies that get D's and F's, and you know who's writing them? It's the people who staff the gender clinics at Boston Children's Hospital, at Vanderbilt, in Denver, in Salt Lake City, in San Francisco. They're writing papers that either get a D or an F or don't even get graded because they're so poor. So there's been 4 long-term, very good studies on suicide. One of them just came out last month, and I gave you in your handout the front page of one of the paper out of Finland. They looked at all 2,083 youth under age 23 who were followed for 5.7 years. This was everybody that had been transitioned in Finland up until the time they closed their clinic. And they compared them to 16,643 matched controls. It is an epic study. And I quote, "Clinical gender dysphoria does not appear to be predictive of all cause nor suicide mortality when psychiatric treatment history is accounted for." That's in other words, they're saying that if you control for autism, anxiety, depression, personality disorders, and so forth, their suicide rates are even, and the care doesn't reduce the suicide rate. In fact, the lead author, Dr. Rita Kaltiala, who is the chief psychiatrist at Tampere University Gender Clinic and a leading European gender expert, stated the following to the media there. And I want you to hear this. "It is purposeful disinformation to say that denial of gender affirmation will result in suicide. Such messaging is reckless and irresponsible." Right below that on my handout, there is a statement that virtually every LGBTQ advocacy organization has signed off on. Should I read it for you? "Don't attribute suicide death to a single factor such as bullying or discrimination, or say that a specific anti-LGBT law or policy will cause suicide. Suicide deaths are almost always the result of multiple overlapping causes, including mental health issues that might not have been recognized or treated. Linking suicide directly to external factors like bullying, discrimination, or anti-LGBT laws can normalize suicide by suggesting that it is a natural reaction to such an experience or laws." There are 3 other long-term studies. I'm not going to go through them. One of them shows, out of Sweden, an even bigger study, shows that the rate of suicide actually doesn't start to go up until 10 years after transitioning. That's why all these short-term studies are meaningless. They're garbage. I think I'm going to stop here, and I'll just allow time for other speakers to talk, but I'll be here to answer questions if you'd like. Thank you.
Mr. Winnie.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. My pitch to you is simple. Leave kids alone. They're going to figure it out. I base that in part on my experience as commanding officer of USS Holland, crew of about 1,400, significant fraction of women, medical department, 3 doctors in it, 2 of which were women. The average age on that ship was 19. These kids were still figuring out a lot of things. At age 44, I was literally the old man. So you can see how the numbers would work out there. But at the end of the day, my concern is very simple. The system wants to draw people in some cases. I saw a young man on another ship drawn into the Navy's alcohol program because he was, quote, "a dry alcoholic," unquote. I let the process play out, of course, and when it was all said and done, my conclusion was that he had been drawn into the system rather than being actually an alcoholic. So I get back into the issue of projection of adults onto the kids and the system pulling kids in some cases. And that is the real basis. They're going to figure it out. And I saw that on that ship. Medical information in the military is not protected by any kind of HIPAA or other things. Those kind of conversations did come up in weekly briefings with my head doctor. We did not dwell on it, but at the end of the day, they all figured it out. Subject to your questions, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winnie. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Robin Goodspeed. I am a Cheyenne resident and a voter and taxpayer, and I am also a born-again Christian, and I am an ex-queer, and I was freed from that lesbian atheist life that I chose early on by the grace of God and the power of Jesus Christ. And I am here today because in the 30-some years I lived in the queer community, I was battling depression and suicide all that time. Yet the psychiatry world in the 70s and 80s and 90s had already bought into the LGBTQ agenda. And I was prescribed the born gay, be happy, take a pill therapy. And I battled depression and suicide for 20, 25 years. Now, during that time, I chose to be in that life because I bought the lie. I was seduced. I bought the lie. But during that time, I knew a lot of trans people personally, here in the Midwest, on the West Coast, and all of them had done their transitions after becoming adults. I am horrified now to understand what the medical/psychiatry/psychology world is doing to children. They are not telling them the truth, because I was not told the truth. I was a sexual abuse victim. And in 20 and 25 years going to therapy, I was never told that, and it was never addressed. And that industry made a lot of money off me during that time. So I am here today in strong support of this bill to give the children of Wyoming a chance to figure things out and to not make irreversible, permanent, horrifying decisions, whether it's at the bequest of their parents or not, or at the bequest of their medical professionals or not. Give them a chance to figure it out. I really urge you to vote in favor of this bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're just about out of time. Mr. Lehman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike Lehman, representing the Catholic Diocese of Cheyenne. In the interest of time, I'll focus just on one specific point. Quoting from a New York Times columnist article talking about the reported small percentage of detransitioners. And she talks a little bit, I think, about human nature, which is important to part of the context in the conversation. She says, let's talk about human nature. People change their minds all the time. Second, admitting to a mistake is hard for anyone. And for many detransitioners, it can feel like a very public reversal. Third, it can take a long time for transition regret to manifest, for patients to make the decision to detransition. It's especially hard for kids who are making decisions about their identities when those identities are still evolving. Many construct their lives around this new identity to admit that they have changed their minds, especially during the excruciatingly self-conscious period of adolescence, when they are deeply susceptible to peer judgment, is extremely difficult. And so I think that's an important part. She goes on, she says, we know that more detransitioners are going public with their decisions. They deserve our compassion. They will likely have a rocky road ahead for them and everyone involved in their care. Some are currently engaged in high-profile malpractice lawsuits against those who medicalize them as minors. And so I think that's just an important part as we consider this context moving forward. We don't know all of the reasons that people are not coming out publicly, and I think that was an important part of the conversation. So with that, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you. Young lady?
Hello, my name is Johanna Seeley. I am the daughter of Karina Seeley, and I'm only 10 years old, and you might not take me seriously, and that's all right. But I'm not opposed to the LGBTQ community. I just think we need to wait for the children, and I believe that God created man and woman, and that's how it should be. And that's all I have to say.
Unfortunately, folks, we're out of time. The House chambers will gavel in about 7 minutes. So I'm going to close public comment with a big apology. I know that there were lots of people who would like to have testified today on both sides of this issue, but the reality of a budget session is we work with finite amount of time. And with that, what I'd like to do, committee, is close public comment and carry over working the bill till 12:30 today. And I know some of you may have other committee assignments where you may not be available, but if we carry over till 12:30 today for committee discussion and amendments, I believe room number 2 is available, and we'll start at 12:30. Okay. All right. Thank you all. And again, my apologies for that short amount of time that we have left to work on. Thanks. Excuse me?
I'll sit up outside. I will follow you up the stairs if needed.
Okay, quickly.
Cool.